Hey everyone, this is Lomi, and I have been so sick this month, oh my gosh. Also, it's not Saturday, and I think that means I finally broke the schedule cycle and feel free to just post updates whenever I want. I don't know, we'll see if I stick with that. So we had a couple days of what they call fool's spring around these parts, and I thought that would be the perfect opportunity to set up my resin printers again. I haven't had my Elegoo Saturn set up in over a year. I put it away after I finished Tall and Link, and then the burnout hit. I'm ready to print things again though, so I start by setting up my table and covering the top with some cheap contact paper. This keeps the table from being ruined by resin spills because I can just cure spilled resin right on top of the contact paper and rip it all off. Since it's destined for the trash in a few weeks anyway, I don't worry about getting it on smooth. It's just there to make cleanup easier. I like contact paper over disposable tablecloths because it's a bit thicker, so it holds up better to stuff being moved around on it. Last year, a very sweet friend gave me their old printer and their wash and cure station when they were moving cross-country, so I really wanted to get them set up and finally use them. I didn't manage to get it done in the summer, and I felt bad because resin doesn't print well in the cold, and the room I keep my printers in gets very cold, but I also wasn't ready to print at that time. Between the burnout and not even having anything ready for printing, there didn't seem like much point. Then I got sick right after my birthday, and I've been super sick all of this month so far. It means I've been unable to do much of anything for the past few weeks, and because of that, my husband got Nomad Sculpt so I would have something to do while I was bundled in blankets on the couch. Between this and the pretty weather, things timed out nicely. I was able to finish a sculpting project I started several years ago. Actually, I finished 2 of them, I think. Both were heads I intended to sculpt to make into characters from my epic fantasy book series, The Snake's Blood Saga. I'd spent a long time shopping for heads and never found anything quite like what I wanted, because there's a certain aesthetic common in ball-jointed dolls, and it means there's not always a whole lot of ethnic diversity. There were only a handful of sculpts ever made in 1/3 scale that I thought would work, and they've been discontinued for some time now, so they weren't dolls I could just run out and get. I started the sculpting process for them back in 2021, and I printed my first drafts in 2022, but after that I was too busy to finish them, and honestly Blender isn't a very fun program to use, nor is it very user-friendly. So getting an easier program to work with like Nomad let me take my partially done sculpts and quickly revise one. I decided to start with Garam. I don't have a lot of drawings of Garam because I'm notoriously bad at finishing artwork, but I keep this drawing of him my sister did a long time ago right above my sewing desk. And his sister Sarah is right below him. She's the other sculpt I'll be doing soon, but today is Garam's moment. I think he'll be the next doll I work on after I finish Vahn's armor. Garam is the captain of the Royal City Guard in the Triad, which makes him Rune's commanding officer from Book 3 onward. His head was almost complete when I stopped work in 2022, just needing some revisions to the eyes and also some changes to make it print better. If I turn his head around, you can see I've kind of dug down into the front part of the head, making a hollow in front of where the S-hook will sit to hold the head on the body and below the eyes. Here's a quick X-ray look at that dip. Using this view mode lets me ensure all my walls are thick enough that the printed resin won't be translucent or weak, but it also shows me where the most solid parts of the head are. And you can see that without this hollow, there would be a very large print area along this line where the inside of the head isn't hollow. One issue I've consistently run into with printing 1/3 scale heads is that without this indentation, you get a head with a very large print area in this region, and the suction force the resin is up against can cause distortion and print flaws. Adding a hollow here helps reduce that suction and gives better prints overall. This indentation would be very hard to cast, so if I intended to do cast resin versions, I'd need to fill this with epoxy for the master sculpt, but I don't plan to cast this doll. The main changes I made between versions 1 and 2 were shrinking the neck hole to fit the body I actually ended up getting, as it had been modified smaller. Then inside the head, I added additional divots for the S-hook, which increases range of mobility for the doll's head to be posed. But the biggest visible change was a repositioning of the eyes to better reflect how I wanted this head to look. Once I had that change made, he was ready for printing, so I got to use my new setup and my new wash and cure station, which made for a fun and exciting day. I also used the newer Elegoo ABS-like 3.0 resin, which proved to print much better than the original version of their ABS-like resin. even though the room was still chilly. Definitely opened some doors for me, and being able to cure the prints under UV LEDs instead of just putting them in the sun and guessing is nice too. Overall, this made the experience much easier. This gray one was the original prototype I printed back in 2022, and you can see the flaws caused by that large print area band around the head. It made rough spots that distorted the print a bit. The inside of the head was a little cleaner but had fewer features, and the neck hole was much larger. The revised version printed very well, with none of the suction distortion I battled on the first version. The neck hole is a more appropriate size, and while this print is still unsanded and the interior sculpting isn't super refined, you can see it's overall a cleaner print with more features and a lot more space inside. These printed about the same size, maybe a 1mm difference between the two types of resin, which is pretty good since I'd forgotten to scale up to accommodate shrinkage on the second head. The ABS-like 3.0 shrinks much less than the older ones. Magnet placement and the like hasn't changed at all. On their faces, you can definitely see the changes I made, and I think the new version's face is much more balanced. Although there aren't obvious real-world versions of the places I create in my books, I try to base character appearances off regions with similar climates to their homelands, and so Garam's features are modeled loosely off those of a man from Western Africa. This tends to mean a more defined and squared jawline, wider cheekbones, and a wider nose, which I think I achieved well with the first version, but the eyes weren't quite right. Based on my study of faces, most West African men have eyes that sit a little lower than my initial sculpt, and the eyes are also a bit larger and farther apart. I spent a lot of time studying photos on Google, but there's also a neat old blog project called World of Averages that provides composite images from places around the world showing mathematically averaged features of people from those places. This composite is useful for getting a quick idea of whether or not the work I've done is in the right ballpark for approximation of the ethnicity I'm trying to capture in my art. It helps confirm that lowering the eyes and making them a little larger and wider really helped me reach the overall look I was going for in portrayal of this character. When I started sculpting my own doll heads, I wasn't sure if this research into facial structure was interesting or anything people cared about, but back when I sculpted my favorite doll, Rune, I'd done similar study of the faces of Pacific Islander men during the sculpting process. The World of Averages project didn't have a lot to offer for that part of the world, so I couldn't rely on it, but my studies did land somewhere between what they showed for Samoa and the Philippines, which makes sense as human migration patterns indicated most Pacific Islanders are likely descended from Southeast Asians. The fact that I studied before sculpting ultimately mattered a lot because I had a lot of private messages from people who were excited to see and recognize their features or the features of people they loved in the sculpting I did for Rune. So I wanted to make sure I put the same amount of thought and effort into creating Garam's likeness as well. Ultimately, I'm satisfied with how this version looks, and I'll be airbrushing or dyeing this head to match his body soon. That's all for today though. Thanks for watching. Bye.